It was around 4 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday when I was driving to work on the interstate. I was in the middle lane, moving quickly because I was already running late. That's why I was startled when I saw a car in my left mirror approaching me at an alarming speed. I was already driving about 75 to 80 miles per hour, so this driver had to be going at least 90 or 100. As the car, a gray Honda Accord coupe, caught up to me, I glanced over out of curiosity to see who was behind the wheel. Despite the early hour and dim light, I could clearly see the driver's face as he looked back at me while passing. Then I noticed something even more unsettling. There was a young woman in the back seat. She was banging on the rear window, and at first, I didn't fully understand what was happening. My initial thought was that it was some kind of joke or prank. Most people don't immediately jump to the conclusion that something sinister is going on. But when I saw the driver abruptly push her out of sight and the car swerve in the process, I knew something was seriously wrong. The woman in the back seat wasn't messing around, she was desperately trying to get someone's attention. I began to speed up, positioning myself behind their car to keep track of them. As I followed, I could see the driver repeatedly reaching into the back seat with a swinging motion, as though he was hitting her. Her arms were flailing, and it was horrifying to watch. It dawned on me that I was witnessing a kidnapping unfold right in front of my eyes. Shaken but determined to help, I grabbed my phone and called 911. While I was explaining the situation to the operator, the car ahead of me suddenly began to slow down, and its brake lights lit up. The driver must have realized that I was following him. Fearing he might have a weapon, I made the split-second decision to drive past him, flooring it to create some distance. I took the next exit but didn't go all the way up the ramp. Instead, I waited on the side, hidden, watching the highway below. When the gray Honda sped past, I quickly cut across the grass and re-entered the highway, determined to keep following him while staying on the line with 911. I accelerated to catch up, pushing my car to speeds of 90 miles per hour or more. The 911 operator continued to guide me as I updated them on the car's location, make, and speed. When I got close again, the driver must have spotted me because he hit the brakes, forcing me to stop. I tried to swerve around him, but he blocked my path. Then he jumped out of his car, holding something in his hand, and ran toward me. In a panic, I threw my car into reverse and backed up quickly. Once he stopped chasing me, I shifted back into drive and sped past him before he could return to his vehicle. The 911 operator reassured me that a state trooper was nearby and urged me to keep driving until I saw the patrol car. The kidnapper, however, was still behind me, and we were both racing down the highway at dangerous speeds. Relief washed over me when flashing red and blue lights appeared in my rearview mirror. The police cruiser quickly closed the gap and pulled in behind the gray Honda. With me ahead and the trooper behind, the driver had no room to maneuver and pulled over onto the shoulder. I stopped as well, keeping a safe distance of at least 2 car lengths, unsure how the situation would unfold. The trooper stepped out with his gun drawn and ordered the driver out of the car. With no choice, the man complied, lying face down on the ground as he was cuffed. Another police car arrived, and the second officer approached the gray Honda to check on the woman in the back seat. She was visibly shaken, covered in bruises, and crying, but her relief at being rescued was overwhelming. She repeatedly thanked me, calling me her savior. It turned out that the driver was her ex-boyfriend. He had shown up at her home earlier that morning, and when she refused to talk to him, he assaulted her, forced her into his car, and locked the child's safety locks so she couldn't escape. It's terrifying to think what he might have done to her if no one had noticed her desperate cries for help. I decided to make a trip to Boston to support a family member running in the Boston Marathon. Instead of flying, I chose to drive from Chicago to Massachusetts, taking Route 20, one of the longest highways in the United States. I'm not a fan of flying, so after work, I hit the road around 3 p.m. My GPS estimated a 15-hour drive, but I figured I could make it in about 14 hours if I pushed through without stopping much. My estimated arrival time was around 6 a.m., though I aimed for 5 a.m. since I rarely stop on long drives, preferring to power through in one go. Most of Route 20 is open land with sparse traffic. By the time I was 10 hours into the trip, it was 1 a.m., and the highway felt deserted. To stay awake, I blasted music and stayed optimistic, knowing I was making progress. Despite drinking 2 cups of coffee earlier, I started to feel a bit drowsy. Still, I didn't want to stop for more coffee. I figured the reward of finally collapsing into bed at my destination would be worth it. At one point, I was the only car in sight. Then, out of nowhere, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. I was in the left lane, but the car behind me was closing in fast, so I moved to the right lane to let it pass. The vehicle, an old, beat-up pickup truck, sped up and passed me but then slowed down to match my speed. Its driver aligned the truck's rear bumper with my front bumper, keeping pace with me for a long stretch. Feeling uneasy, I decided to accelerate and get ahead of him, but as soon as I did, the truck moved into my lane behind me, tailgating so closely it seemed like he might hit me. I had no choice but to speed up more, hoping to shake him off, but he matched my speed every time. When I switched to the left lane, he did the same. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. This wasn't some unmarked police vehicle. It was an old, ratty pickup. Then, the truck's headlights started flashing. My heart began to race. I didn't slow down, afraid of what this could turn into. I pressed harder on the gas, pushing my speed up by another 5 to 10 miles per hour, desperately hoping to see another car or, better yet, a cop. But the highway stretched on, empty except for the occasional car zooming by on the opposite side. The truck suddenly swerved into the left lane and floored it, its engine roaring as it overtook me. The driver cut in front of me and started braking erratically, forcing me to slam on my brakes. I tried to swerve around, but the driver blocked me at every attempt. Feeling trapped, I leaned on my horn, hoping it would deter him. Instead, he turned on his hazard lights and waved his arm out the window, signaling for me to pull over. There was no way I was stopping. I seized an opportunity when the truck began pulling onto the grass and swerved around it, flooring the gas pedal. My sedan wasn't fast, but it was quicker than his clunky pickup. I hit 100 miles per hour, but when I glanced in the rearview mirror, he was still right behind me. I veered off the highway at the first exit and stopped at the red light at the bottom of the ramp, hoping the truck had given up. To my dismay, its headlights appeared again, pulling up behind me. Worse, the truck moved up beside me at the red light. I glanced to my left, and the driver's window rolled down. Inside were 3 figures wearing Guy Fawkes masks, all staring directly at me. I could tell they were trying to scare me, and it worked. Panic surged through me, and I blew through the red light onto a more populated main road. Finally, there were other cars around, and to my relief, the truck didn't follow me any further. I parked in a Walmart parking lot a few miles away and, still shaken, fell asleep in my car. I woke up around 8 a.m., still rattled by the incident, but determined to finish the drive. When I reached my destination, I told my family what had happened and warned everyone to stay vigilant while driving late at night. It's terrifying to think about what could have happened if I hadn't managed to get away. It was a Tuesday evening in March, and I was driving home from visiting a friend in the city. On a good day, the drive would take about an hour, but a thick fog had rolled in over the desolate highway, making the trip far more challenging. After midnight, this particular stretch of road rarely saw much activity, except for the occasional semi-trucks with unfamiliar license plates from far-off places I'd never been. The clock read 1 a.m., and it had been a long, exhausting day. My friends and I had spent hours wandering around the city, shopping and exploring new cafes. The combination of fatigue and the dense fog turned the drive into a monotonous blur of shifting gray, making it hard to focus. I was driving carefully, occasionally slowing to a crawl and activating my hazard lights to alert any vehicles behind me. Out of nowhere, a car appeared up ahead, its tires half on the shoulder and half on the road. I slammed on my brakes and swerved, narrowly avoiding its bumper. My heart was pounding as I quickly pulled over behind the vehicle to catch my breath. The black sedan in front of me began to slowly inch forward until it was fully parked on the shoulder. Its engine idled for a moment before the driver's side window rolled down, and a hand emerged, motioning for me to pull over. Still shaken from the near collision, I hesitated. But it seemed logical to move further off the highway, so I followed the car as it turned onto a small side road and came to a stop. The driver stepped out and started walking toward my car, cutting through the thick fog. He was tall and lean, wearing a black winter coat and jeans, and appeared to be in his early 30s. His face was illuminated by my headlights, and he was smiling as he approached. I rolled my window down just a crack, thinking he might be coming to apologize for his reckless parking. He gestured for me to lower the window further, but I shook my head and said I could hear him just fine. He asked where I was headed, and I replied, home. He then mentioned how the fog wasn't expected to lift anytime soon and said it wasn't safe to drive in such conditions. I assured him I was okay and capable of handling it. He raised an eyebrow and asked why I had pulled over in the first place. Not wanting to escalate the situation, I lied and said I had received a phone call and needed to stop to answer it. The man smirked, as if he knew I was lying. Then he mentioned that he lived just a few minutes down the road with his wife and son, suggesting I should wait out the fog at his house. I shook my head again, politely declining, but he wouldn't let it go. He tried to scare me by saying that driving in the fog greatly increased my chances of getting into an accident and that I looked tired. He even said I should think about my loved ones before risking my life on the road. Despite his persistence, I held firm. That's when his demeanor shifted, and he started glancing back at his car. My stomach dropped as I noticed movement in the passenger seat. Someone I hadn't seen before was sitting there. Suddenly, the man grabbed at my door handle, tugging at it aggressively. Thankfully, my doors were locked. Before I could react further, the passenger door of his car flew open, and another man jumped out, sprinting toward me with a baseball bat in hand. I threw my car into reverse as the driver shouted something to his accomplice. The man swung the bat, but it missed as I quickly backed up. The fog made it almost impossible to tell where the side road ended and the highway began, but I managed to reverse far enough to angle my car back toward the main road. I prayed there were no cars behind me as I gunned it onto the highway, not daring to look back. My heart raced as I sped away, headlights piercing the fog in front of me. To this day, whenever I drive that stretch of highway, I can't help but wonder if they targeted anyone else that night, and what might have happened if I'd let my guard down and rolled the window down further. What I'm about to tell you is the strangest experience I've ever lived through. My name is Mary. My friend Carol and I were driving from Florida to New Jersey a few months ago. We had just visited some friends who went to school down there. It was a really fun time, but Carol and I had to get on with our lives. The drive was supposed to be fun. Just a little road trip, just the two of us with snacks, music, and time to catch up on all the things we hadn't talked about in ages. In hindsight, it probably would have been a better idea to stay one more night at our friend's place, but I wanted to get home. We were planning to do the whole drive in one shot. We drove through the night and into the next morning. A few hours after the sun came up, my back started to ache from sitting in the same position for so long. I told Carol we should pull over somewhere for a break, grab some gas, and maybe find something to eat before we got back on the road. We drove past a few more exits before ultimately getting off at what claimed to be a lively, touristy town. For the life of me, I can't remember what the actual name of the town was. It was one of those places you'd expect to be a tourist stop, with signs pointing to attractions and promises of unique shops or local history. But even as we pulled in, I felt something was off. The streets were empty, and the buildings looked like they'd seen better days, too worn down for a place supposedly catering to visitors. It's hard to explain the feeling, but it was the kind of place where you could sense something was wrong without actually knowing what. I'm sure everyone knows what I'm talking about. Ever driven through one of those ghost towns where all the shop signs are still up but everything is clearly abandoned? Yeah, that's what it felt like. Only it was weirder, since things weren't actually abandoned, they just looked that way. It wasn't your typical haunted kind of vibe, but it was strange enough that it's been on my mind ever since. The first stop was the convenience store. We actually had to drive for a decent while before entering the heart of the town, or whatever you'd call it. We pulled into a stretch and grabbed some refreshments. The two of us headed inside. It looked pretty normal in there. Carol was looking for a specific drink she wanted but quickly grew frustrated when she realized they didn't have it. She's a bit of a drama queen, so I indulged her tantrum and agreed to go somewhere else. I still wanted to get my Gatorade though, so I walked up to the counter with it to pay. The cashier was a woman, about 30 or 35, if I had to guess. She had dark brown hair and was on the taller side. Again, all very normal. The only reason I remembered her features was because she was wearing suspenders, which I wasn't used to seeing. I paid for my drink and we left. Carol pointed to another convenience store across the street, so we figured we'd give it a shot. When we walked into the second store, I literally felt my stomach drop. The cashier behind the counter looked exactly like the girl who'd been working at the first place. Same hair, same face, same height, same everything. I froze, staring at her. I could tell I was making her uncomfortable. Eventually, I asked her if she had a twin or a sister or something. She gave me a weird look, almost skeptical, and said she didn't have a twin and that she was an only child. She narrowed her eyes and told me that that was a strange thing to ask, which I guess it was. I tried to explain myself, but she didn't say anything after that. I felt this weird sense of déjà vu and backed out of the store, dragging Carol along with me. Carol was confused, but I explained myself and asked if she noticed the same thing. She said she didn't remember what the other cashier looked like and that I was probably just tired from driving for so long. I knew what I saw, though, and told her I'd prove it. We ran back to the first convenience store, but when we got there, the girl inside looked nothing like who I remembered seeing. She was a completely different person, short with light hair and looked middle-aged. There's absolutely no chance anyone could have confused her for the other cashier. She didn't even look like she was in the same age range. It was as if I had imagined the whole thing. Carol told me to just forget about it and that I was tired, but I insisted that I wasn't imagining things. Eventually, I had no choice but to let it go. I was eager to get out of there, but we needed gas. We pulled into the first gas station we saw, which was completely empty. Just our car, the pumps, and a small building at the back where you would pay. We were literally the only car in the entire lot. The two of us walked inside. Carol took her sweet time looking for her drink, but of course it wasn't there either. I paid, waited for her, and we left. We couldn't have been in there for more than a few seconds. As we walked out, I again felt a weird feeling in my gut. What had been a completely empty gas station just seconds ago was now packed to the brim. The place was overflowing with people. It was the strangest thing. Cars filled every single pump, and there were even some lined up as if we'd wandered into rush hour at the busiest station in the state. All the parking spots in the back lot were full too. To make matters worse, it felt like everyone was eyeing us down as we walked to our car. I don't think I've ever felt more uncomfortable by people staring at me. This time, Carol agreed that something bizarre was going on. I could tell that both of us felt the same eerie suspicion. It was like we'd left reality for a second, and when we came back, something had shifted. We decided to say screw it on the food and just find our way back to the highway. I didn't have much of an appetite at that point anyway. Back on the road, we didn't say much for a while. I wasn't scared, but I just had a bad feeling in my gut. I'm not sure how to even explain it. As we got slightly further away, Carol and I talked about how weird that had just been. As we were talking, a car passed us, a Toyota Sienna with a cracked windshield. I remember it distinctly because the windshield had this big spiderweb crack running through it, and the side was scratched up pretty bad. It was kind of hard to miss. Carol made a joke about it, but I can't remember exactly what it was. Just as we were starting to loosen up, everything came crashing down again. About 10 minutes later, the exact same minivan passed us again. We were both 100% sure of it. Again, it was impossible to miss with this massive crack in the windshield. How was that even possible, though? We had been driving in a straight line at a pretty fast clip. There's no way it could have gotten ahead of us, but the odds of passing two different Siennas with identical cracks in the windshield were insanely slim. Carol started saying, "Oh my God," over and over again, and I could tell she was on the verge of a panic attack. She told me to speed up, which I did. I was dying inside, but I had to keep it together as the driver and for Carol's sake. I wanted nothing more than to get back on the highway and leave that place behind forever. I glanced down at the GPS and saw that an hour had somehow passed since we had left the gas station, which was virtually impossible. I wanted to tell Carol about it, but I didn't know if she could take any more weird stuff. My heart was in my throat, but I just kept driving. Part of me wondered if the GPS was going to start taking us in circles. We finally got back on the highway, and the nightmare ended there. By the time we got home, however many hours later, it felt like we were waking up from some strange, disjointed dream. I'm not kidding, that whole experience still feels like a dream when I think back to it. People usually look at me strangely when I tell them this story. I still can't explain what happened there, and I don't expect any kind of explanation. I've tried doing research online about weird occurrences in places like that, and I've actually found a handful of stories that are similar to mine. The weirdest thing about it was the feeling in my gut that I still have trouble describing. Until that point, I really didn't know what it meant to get a bad vibe from something. It's like every bone in your body is begging you to notice that something's wrong. I never want to get that feeling again. If these highway tales gave you second thoughts about your next drive, be sure to hit like and subscribe for more spine-chilling real-life stories. Which one gave you the creeps the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And hey, share this with a friend to remind them to stay alert on the road. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next video.